Thanks for joining us today on the Big Blue Podcast. I'm Leigh Goodson, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Stone, here at the McKeon Center for Creativity at the Metro campus.
Hello, Dr. Goodson.
Yeah, how you doing, Greg?
I'm well. I'm excited to learn more about what Pat's going to share with us today.
Yeah, our guest today is Pat Green. I call him Patrick Green, which he says his mother would absolutely appreciate. Patrick's the interim vice president for workforce development, and that's a pretty big deal. It's a huge responsibility, so we're excited to learn more about what you're doing in that role. So recently, I had asked a few people to give presentations about the 4 pillars used to evaluate colleges based on the Aspen Prize, and you presented on workforce development, and you were quoted as saying, "Never before has the link between a college education and postgraduate job prospects been more important," which comes straight from the Aspen Institute. So tell us what's happened recently, and especially there's a much greater focus on community colleges than there was before. So talk to us about that and how you've seen that change.
Great. So yes, I think the quote is exactly spot on when we consider that more and more as the economy is moving from less of an industrial model to more of a knowledge-based economy, more and more jobs require higher and higher skills. And we know that the best defense against unemployment and the best way to earn high wages is still getting post-secondary education. So I think as in the last few years of tuition rates kind of continue to climb across the country, students more and more view a college education as an investment rather than just an experience. Mm. And I think that they're wise in doing so, but it puts sort of an onus on the colleges to connect those outcomes to jobs for them.
Well, I can imagine that shift from an industrial economy to a knowledge-based economy is probably one of the major reasons why Oklahoma's been losing ground a bit, because our economy primarily has been more industrial. And we're one of several states, I would assume quite a few states, really sort of losing ground in terms of numbers of degrees earned by students in the state. Are there other factors at play, though?
There are a multitude of factors why a state might lose college graduates. I mean, to be frank, typically when economies are in an upswing, states tend to lose college graduates because sometimes there are ways to find work while you're in college. I would caution anybody considering that to say that over the life of your career, that credential is going to be more valuable than whatever you can find without it. But that certainly is one of the reasons in a state like Oklahoma that is a more industrial-based economy than maybe some states, although I would argue it's probably transitioning. There are ways to find work during an economic upswing that might not require a degree. But regardless, it's the best defense against poverty, the best defense against unemployment that there is that post-secondary credential.
Which we know education is so closely tied to,
yes.
Right? I mean, the more education you have, the more likely you are to be out of poverty or to get out of poverty.
That's exactly right. Unemployment rates and income are very discreetly tied to the level of education a person has.
Talk to us about the skills gap. We hear a lot about the skills gap.
Right.
The governor talks about the skills gap with Oklahoma Works and Launch Oklahoma, and the state chamber is getting ready to launch their OK 2030 initiative, which is about having a healthy economy throughout the state. And so in all this language with the chambers and various government entities, we hear about this skills gap. Can you define that for our listeners, and then just talk to us a little bit about where we are with the skills gap?
Great. So the most simple definition I can give you of the skills gap is it's the difference in educational attainment and jobs required in a given state, or a given region. So in Oklahoma, the governor's data would tell us that we need 70% of our adult population over the age of 25 to have some sort of post-secondary credential to meet the job needs of our economy. Right now, that number is between 40 and 50%. So the attainment gap is the skills gap. for us.
Wow.
And is that based on projections of jobs to come? Is that jobs that are available right now?
Added jobs and openings.
Okay, so it's both.
Right, both.
That's pretty interesting. I don't think everybody has a grasp of what that is. And because we talk about it, and it's this ambiguous thing that we keep hearing about.
It is. It does sound ambiguous until you put real numbers behind it.
Right.
The number that comes from the governor's office as well, when you think about 70% of the people in this state over the age of 25, this is not K-12. The entire K-12 population could come to college and finish college, and we would be hundreds of thousands of people short. 600,000 additional adults, that's in addition to our current graduation rates, need to be finishing post-secondary education between now and 2025.
Wow, that's incredible. Our guest today on the Big Blue Podcast is Patrick Green, Interim Vice President for Workforce Development, and we're discussing TCC's efforts that you are working on with various corporate partnerships and things like that. And this is part one of a two-part series.
That's right.
Talking with Patrick Green.
And Pat, sort of to the point about the skills gap, and you mentioned, in addition to the current graduates who are graduating from the state, we need an additional 600,000, which is staggering, right? Fortunately, TCC alone does not have to provide those 600,000, but I mean, realistically, we're responsible for a set number of graduates. If you look at the number of institutions in the state who are playing a role in filling the skills gap, what role as an institution, sort of broadly speaking, are we going to be playing in helping to fill that gap by 2025?
Well, we're going to play. We have to play a major role to fill that gap. If you look at the numbers just here in Tulsa, that age of over 25, there's about 600,000 people in our service area that are that age. A quarter of them have some college and no credential. So most of those people will have to come back to complete something with us, whether that's a bachelor's degree, they're going to start with us, or if it's an associate's degree, they'll complete with us, knowing the concentration of populations between us and Oklahoma City, that we're going to be largely responsible for this region's closure of the skills gap, I think.
And we were just talking yesterday, too, about that 24% of adults over the age of 25 who have some college. That's really high for other cities this size, right?
It is. Nationally, about 16% of the adult population has somewhere between beginning college and a degree. They have some college and no degree. Here in Tulsa, right, about 24%, about 1 in 4 adults over the age of 25 has some college and no degree.
So we've got a head start in some ways. It's just getting people to finish.
That's right. It's to go back to the pathways. It's about getting people to and through. Obviously, those numbers with that number of people having some college education in Tulsa, we've gotten a lot of people to here. Closing the skills gap absolutely requires people getting through the college.
You've talked a lot about the importance when we close the skill gap of the equity imperative. Can you explain that to us and tell us why it's so important?
I can. So when we look at attainment right now, we know that attainment levels vary among adults and people that are traditional college age, and they vary among socioeconomic and racial demographics as well. And when we're talking about 600,000 additional people, and when we're talking about 53% of the jobs between now and 2025 requiring degrees, that creates an equity imperative. It really changes the way higher ed ought to think about employment, because it means we're going to have many more adults engaged and a much more diverse population engaged. We also sit in a state with very low unemployment. Tulsa has an unemployment rate of 4.4%. And a lot of economists would tell you that means we're full. We're full employment. But we know companies are advertising. The pool of people in this metro area that have no degree or could benefit from degrees we offer is very diverse. More diverse than we would traditionally serve, more diverse than a university traditionally serves. So it creates an imperative that really everything we do at the college needs to have equity in mind, because the type of student we need to see is going to change.
Just before we wrap up this segment, projections are that jobs added to the state economy in the next decade, the majority of them are going to require at least an associate's degree or a certificate. What industries are those jobs going to emerge from? I mean, is healthcare, I assume, is one of them as the population ages? What other areas are we looking at to see those jobs emerge from?
Healthcare will be the lion's share of those jobs. That is as the population ages, and as those many of those healthcare occupations have moved from certificate programs to degree programs. That absolutely will be the largest share. Other than that, the energy industry, manufacturing are all seeing increased talent requirements. As I've said in some talks previously, during the recession, 4 out of 5 jobs lost during the Great Recession were low-skill jobs. And for us, that means they require only a high school diploma. That's 80% of those jobs. We've added, since 2008, 11 million jobs in this country that require some education beyond high school. There have only been 80,000 new jobs created in the entire country. 80,000 in the entire country where a high school diploma is good enough to go to work.
Which is a huge shift from
that's amazing.
10, 20 years ago even.
People left one kind of economy, and they were out for 4 or 5 years. And they came back to a very different labor market, a very different economy than the one they left, that requires higher skills, and not just higher technical skills. It requires higher levels of critical thinking and adaptability than the labor market that they left.
And so we're going to ask Pat to stick around for another segment and talk a little more specifically, Dr. Goodson, about what the college's role is in helping those people navigate to that new economy. So with that, we'll thank you for joining us. Pat, thanks for sticking around. This has been the Big Blue Podcast. And remember, you can catch us each week at the Big Blue Podcast in the week at TCC and on the Creativity channel on YouTube. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.